I am your number one fan.
This guy is my number one fan. Hello and welcome, peasants. I am your overlord in this domain, and today we are going to talk about dirty financial tricks with my bestie for life, Steve Durrell, the number one fan of the show. So,
Glad to
that's
be
it.
here, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks
It's
for coming.
it's great to see you again. It's a pleasure to be back in Connecticut.
Yeah,
You know,
welcome home.
yeah, I haven't lived in Connecticut for like almost 2 years now. So every time I come back here, it's like kind of like an exotic experience. Everything's a little bit different, a little bit askew. A lot of new road work being done or new stores going up.
There's always road work being done because our infrastructure is crap.
Yeah. How long has Route 2 been under construction? It seems like
It's all the time.
7 years now.
It's all the time. I don't know for sure when the project is supposed to end, but it's just all the time. There's always something new to be fixed. There's always, as soon as you see inspectors going around a bridge, you'll know that it's time for that bridge to be fixed. I heard that we have the worst roads and bridges in the United States.
That is not true.
It's not true?
I can personally attest, living in Indiana for the past 2 years, that Indiana's roads suck. They are the worst. Or at least up in the north, because they get like really bad frost heaves, I guess, and then they just don't repair the roads ever. So, but yeah, I ran into a lot of Route 2 construction last night around 4:30, 5 a.m. driving 13 hours across the country. And I have to say, I listened to your last episode with Jack last night, and that was a good show. Actually, it kept me awake. Because you went over. You did like 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, we like doubled the length. I think the guests having Jack as a guest was perfect because we've already been there and had those conversations. We've talked for hours and hours already. We used to live together, so it was easy to go 2.5 hours. I think that we could probably do the same for this episode. But anyways, yeah, it was better. It's better. I'm much happier with guests.
I agree. I actually have a radio show, or I did. I guess it's over now that I'm done with school. But on my college radio station, I have a radio program. And yeah, I think the best episodes were with guests. I had a wide variety of guests.
Do you ever have anybody call in?
Yeah, I do have callers. I actually I have a dedicated listener on. I do the show a few nights a week, so I get different listeners on different nights. And on Saturday nights, I have a cop who's always calling in, Officer Nick. So I'm a little extra careful on Saturday nights, I guess, for what I say. But he's actually got a really good taste in music. He let me on to a bunch of new psychedelic bands I'd never heard of. So,
Oh yeah? He's one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Cool cop.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Great.
But yeah, I've had a lot of good times on my radio show, and I'm gonna miss it. So you're lucky to have your own podcast here.
You can have your own podcast.
I guess
too.
that's true. I guess
it's very easy.
Anyone could have their podcast. As we were just saying, your brother-in-law has a podcast.
Oh yeah, he does.
So
yep.
Maybe in the future, everyone will have their own podcast.
Yeah, I don't know what that would even look like. I imagine because right now it's not novel anymore. It's not like it's not little like it used to be. It's like really blown up. I mean, the first time I heard about podcasts when I was working at Home Depot, that was like 2007 or 8, I think was the first time I heard about it. So I can't really imagine hearing about it any earlier than that. That was definitely the first time I had heard the term podcast was from my coworker Kip. He's like, I really I enjoy listening to podcasts and going running. I was like, what the fuck is a podcast? He's like, oh, it's just an internet show. Just people who do their own internet show and they broadcast it on the internet. I thought about how cool that was back then, but I don't know. I just was a kid and wasn't really thinking about it.
See, I haven't really gotten into too many podcasts besides yours. Yours is by far my favorite podcast, if not my favorite thing on the internet. But
wow, that's high praise.
I mean, Joe Rogan, I know he was probably the first podcast I had heard of. I know Mark Maron has a podcast. I don't know if you ever listen to his.
No, no. I've
Um,
been told to many times, but I haven't.
he has a really good episode with Louis C.K. on there when they just talk about like their
I
history
think you,
together.
yeah, I think you might have sent me a message telling me to listen to that one because it's really good.
Yeah,
But yeah, it
well,
sounds like it would be good.
yeah, they just go over like when they were coming up as comedians, and I guess they actually didn't like each other for a while or something. But besides those two people, I mean, I haven't really listened to that many podcasts. Who would you say is your favorite podcast?
Well,
Podcast. What's the
podcaster,
yeah? Is that the noun for that?
I guess.
Okay.
I haven't since I changed jobs. I don't work at the factory anymore. For those of you who don't know, I might not have even mentioned this, but I switched jobs. I work for a nice outside roof cleaning company now, where I can be out in the sun and get all my vitamin D and put my feet in the bare grass, or my bare feet in the grass, and get rid of all my negative charge. Anyway, so, but I don't have too much time to listen to podcasts anymore,
That's
honestly.
unfortunate.
But before, when I was really going hard, um, it would change from time to time. It all depended on which show had what guest or what they were talking about. I really like the one that I got once I got hooked on it. I burned through like 2 years of this guy's material. This dude David Crowther, he did this History of Britain podcast,
That's
and
pretty
he
cool.
started it was his first podcast ever.
Mm.
He's like, I'm David Crowther, and I'm a historian. This is my first podcast, and I thought I would do History of Britain. So he starts with basically like the Dark Ages,
Right.
the sort of all the kingdoms of whatever, the 7 or 8 kingdoms or whatever of England, all sort of their wars with the Vikings, their wars with each other, how they became consolidated under Wessex, and it goes through from there all the way through. I think he stops. I haven't even finished it yet, so I don't know how far he goes. Right now, I'm at Henry V, like Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke, and his son Henry V.
Mm.
That's where I stopped. And that was really good. Like that was definitely my favorite because they were like 25 minutes, 25 30 minutes, short, but they were long enough that you got the information. He took it on nice little chunks.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I liked him. I definitely like when Duncan Trussell would have good some of his guests on. I really liked some of his guests. For a while, I I also liked this buddy of his, Johnny Pemberton, had a podcast, and I was listening to it for a while, and it wasn't updating, and I forgot. I must have turned off the updating or something, and I didn't get to. I kind of fell out of. Excuse me, belching because I have drinking. We're drinking Shinerbach.
I have never had Shinerbach before.
I like
This is a new
It's
experience for
not
me.
bad.
No, it's not. From Shiner, Texas.
I
Pretty
like
cool.
it's got a ram on the front.
Yeah, it's pretty
It's
badass.
pretty cool. Enjoy Shinerbach. I feel like this is what Llewellyn Moss would have been drinking in No Country for Old Men.
Mm.
Seems about right.
What they have out in Indiana is ham beer, and I got a 30 rack, I believe. Yeah, I got a 30 rack of that once for $13.
Ham beer?
Yeah.
So does it taste like ham or
It's like John Ham,
Oh,
HAMM. Yeah,
MM? Okay.
right. So what was that guy's name? David
Crowther.
Crowther.
So crow and then THER.
Gotcha.
Crowther.
Well, I think that's interesting.
David Crowther.
Something
He would do plays and he would have his kids come on and reenact certain historical figures.
right, like Henry V.
Yeah,
It's pretty cool.
pretty cool.
That's sweet that he does that. What I actually wanted to talk today about was the history of central banking.
Yeah,
which actually
That's why you're on the show.
has a long history in England. So it would be cool to listen to him because I'm sure there are probably some parallels or times when he might go into
The
that.
Rothschilds don't really get mentioned too much.
Yeah.
They don't really. He doesn't really talk about banking beyond the guilds, like mentioning the rise of the guilds.
Mm,
Um, most of it's just like the royal dynasty,
right.
and the progression of the crown, like
Well, the
throughout
thing
the
about
ages.
banking is I don't think that it's really gets as much acknowledgement in society as it should, because if you think about it, our whole financial system, our money, everything that has to do with money is influenced by banks, specifically central banks. And I don't think we really talk about it that often, especially like I've always been interested in politics, like even back in high school and in college, but um, I never really had an interest in banking at that time. I guess just because it seems boring. Like, who wants to talk
Oh
about
yeah,
derivatives
yeah.
and interest rates and all like these stupid mathematical things? And that's another thing too. Is I just I finished a business degree, and it continues on even in graduate business. Like, they don't really talk about the real world effects of these things. It's all just about, if you plug in, these different numbers into this formula, this graph goes up or down, and that's it. And it's very dry and boring and kind of divorced from the real world realities that happen when
I feel
institutions
like that's on
take over
purpose.
monetary systems. Yeah, I I probably would agree too. It was funny. My macroeconomics course that specifically dealt with that was taught by someone who used to work in the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. Which again, I
Not a federal institution either. Not actually a federal branch,
so
right?
right. The Federal Reserve is an interesting example because it highlights something that there's a theory of regulatory capture in economics, which is that um, large corporations can go to the government and through lobbying, lobby politicians to get regulations passed that seemingly it looks like the government's trying to control an industry to kind of benefit the populace
Right.
and kind of make a more even playing field. What it actually does is it empowers these larger corporations by making it harder for their competitors to
Right.
actually compete with them, because you set a bar where the smaller competitors can't reach it, and in effect it knocks them out of the industry so that the larger corporations can consolidate power.
Yeah, they just get consumed.
Right.
They can't compete.
And that's kind of what has happened with banking. So originally, when banks first emerged, well, first of all, I guess we should go over the history of money. So,
Yeah, break it down. I at least wanted to get to that stuff we talked about last spring.
right,
The crime of 79 or
73.
73,
Yeah,
excuse me.
yeah.
79 rhymes, so
um, but yeah, so I guess that would be we should start at the beginning. So people didn't originally use money. It's just kind of like a invention of the past few thousand years. Originally, people just bartered, which you know I guess probably persisted in throughout the Middle Ages, even probably in like the
there was
medieval
still
England.
trading. I mean, there was trading. They had the Roman Empire had coinage.
Right.
So, and then after that, kind of the petty kings, that was sort of a symbol of that you had kind of made it and had enough power to actually start making money of your own face. I think Charlemagne had coins. I'm not sure. I can't remember for 100%, but I'm pretty sure he had coinage in his name. And
Well, I know that some kingdoms around that time also would debase their currency. So when they would mint coins in gold or silver, it wouldn't actually be the weight that it was supposed to be.
okay,
So then for a while, these minted coins actually fell out of regard. But one thing I actually wanted to ask you about, because when I was listening to your show last night, you talked a lot about like kind of mythology, I guess, which I'm not too familiar with.
I'm trying to think exactly of all the different things that we talked about, but I don't know. Keep going. You
But
might
so
jog my memory. So
so going back to the history of money. So people originally bartered things; they just exchanged, a
goods
cattle
and services.
cattle for grain or whatever. But the problem was that you might not necessarily want what the other person had, so trading was kind of complicated. And then over time, different societies came up with money, things that could be used as just value holders that you could
Like
exchange.
a proxy.
Right, exactly. So in some places they used seashells in
Wampum.
yeah, animal skins, whatever. They used all kinds of different things.
Yep.
But around the world, in all kinds of different societies, kind of as like a universal standard, gold and silver both
Yeah.
emerged as
Yeah.
these valuable things.
I think I know where you're going with
So
this.
I mean, what I was going to ask you is, I mean, is there any like mythology around gold and
Oh,
silver?
sure.
I know. So I last summer I spent in Japan, and I kind of ran into just some kind of weird examples of this, like in Kyoto, which is this beautiful ancient city, by the way.
Yeah.
And if you ever go to Japan, please go to Kyoto. There's temples all over the city, and there's two large ones specifically. Jinkakuji and Kinkakuji, which are the Golden Temple and the Silver Temple,
Okay.
and they're very important, and they're associated with the goddess of the sun and the god of the moon.
Right.
So
That's appropriate.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I was curious if there are examples of that in like European mythology, because I'm not really familiar with that. Why gold and silver might be regarded, as because it's just
Well, it's I
a
mean,
mineral at the end of the
right,
day.
but you look at it, it's even its basic properties, okay, so let's say we take the perspective of just these are cavemen, there's no aliens, there's no like gods, there's nothing, there's no kind of intervention, and we just came up with this on our own through power, through observation, and like attributing this to that by through similarity. You know
Right.
what I mean? So like you look at the moon, and the moon would reflect on, reflect, it would look like silver anyways. Like when you'd see
Right.
silver, you'd look at it and you say, "Wow, that shimmers like the moon. Like it's a rock that has the moon, the light of the moon trapped in it." It would
Right.
make sense. And then the same way gold would have, sunlight. It's they're kind of two of the same thing.
That's true. You know what else
But
is
okay.
well? Okay, so is there any mystical belief like what was that the thing Isaac Newton was into where like you try to turn
Transmutation,
you-
alchemy.
alchemy?
We
That's what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we try to transmute lead into gold, or
Right.
changing the chemical properties of
So
something
I mean
into gold.
I'm just saying I guess I would imagine there must be some kind of like mystical association with properties in gold and silver, because if you even want to go back to like the conspiracy theory stuff, like
The Anunnaki.
yeah, all
Yeah,
that,
they came to our planet to mine gold
right.
to repair their atmosphere,
Mm.
whatever. That's the same fucking. You know what else is funny is L. Ron Hubbard, Battlefield Earth. Have you ever
Yeah,
read Battlefield Earth?
I haven't, but I
I
kind of know
read
what
it.
it is.
I read that fucker. It's like it's over 1,000 pages. It's like reading Shogun or something. Um, all their whole thing was we need gold to
Oh
repair
yeah.
our atmosphere, and uranium is like deadly to them.
Mm.
That it can ignite their gas, the gas that they breathe. So I mean that's fucking Battlefield Earth. But the Anunnaki thing, that was the reason that supposedly they came here was to repair their planet. They needed our gold to fix their atmosphere to create some sort of shield.
Mm.
But who knows where that story comes from? You get it off a website, and where did that website get it? And then
Right.
everything supposedly goes back to this guy Zachariah Stitchin, and then there's a whole host of people out there saying that guy was full of shit and he interpreted everything wrong. So
Mm.
I don't know what to believe about that. Supposedly Nibiru, this rogue 10th planet, was supposed to be coming through our solar system, and we would have seen it by now. I saw supposedly a picture of Nibiru rising at a 33-degree angle from the South Pole out in the ocean. But it's it looked like a star, like a really weird star.
Pretty cool.
But yeah, and that hasn't. I mean, we would have seen it by now. It would have
Mm.
been over the horizon, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I generally
Excuse me.
plead agnostic on any of that mystical kind of stuff. I just think it's interesting to address,
But
just to consider different perspectives on things, I suppose.
through all the bullshit, there's got to be I mean, why? Why? Why was it gold and silver? Like
Well, you know what else is cool too
it's not
is
something that you can't preserve food with it, or
different societies. Not only did they use both gold and silver, they created an amalgam that's called electrum, and different societies used that as a means of exchange also. from the Middle East to Europe to
They
Japan.
they just melted it together?
Yeah, just create like an amalgamated thing between gold and silver.
Wow,
It's called electrum.
that's cool.
So back to banking, I guess. So
Right.
you actually, too, you touched on the beginning of banking last night, or when I listened to your show last night, whenever you did that episode with Jack, with the Knights Templar.
That was the episode before that.
No, it was last night.
It
It
was?
was last one. Yeah, you talked about the Knights Templar and how they. Well, I guess you didn't go too much into it. You start talking about the Hospitallers too.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. No, okay, I remember we were talking about that for a minute.
But yeah, the Knights Templar were actually the first system of Christian banking
Yeah,
in Europe. So back, I guess in the Bible somewhere, I don't know where this. Maybe you know. I suppose in the Old Testament it says something about not collecting interest on someone of the same religion. I guess so. The
I would
effect that
imagine that would be in Deuteronomy.
the effect that had was in medieval Europe, Jews would not charge other Jews interest on loans,
Right,
and
right.
Christians would not charge Christians on loans. And that's actually so. What they did was because Jews weren't allowed to own land in medieval Europe, they ended up starting this system of banking where they would loan money to the Christians who would speculate on their crop yields for the next year. And they'd be able to like get money for it beforehand. And that's also like where kind of racist stereotype against Jews comes from for like being money lenders or whatever. It's because of the system that they had in place in medieval Europe.
That's the only and it's funny because white Christians created that system
Right.
because they
By
wouldn't
law.
let Jews have land.
Exactly. So it was yeah. So even like that medieval style of banking was like from like the king's dictates. So like essentially from government using coercion to manipulate the marketplace.
You know something? Not to just to interrupt. Those English kings, they were always like he meant Crowther mentions this on his podcast, but they're always like John and Richard. They're always like beating on the Jews, like, oh yeah, let's go down and shake down the Jews.
Mm.
They would always do that. They would like come in and have them roughed up by the sheriff and take extra taxes from them and shit.
Yeah.
They were usually like the first to get pinched.
I mean, and effectively it just created this double standard too, or like this weird kind of double think where either collecting interest is good or it's bad, like objectively it's right or it's wrong. It shouldn't be okay for certain groups of people to charge other groups of people interest or not. It doesn't really make any sense at all.
While not charging it to their own group
Mm,
at the same time.
right, exactly.
Uh,
But the Knights Templar, I guess, they kind of broke away from that trend and started a system of Christian banking where during the Crusades, if you wanted to go fight or if you wanted to go to the Holy Land, you'd give your wealth to the Knights Templar, and then once you'd get there, you would get it back, or
yeah.
you'd get
You'd
goods
have
and
a receipt.
services
They would
there.
give you a receipt for it.
Right,
You would
which
deposit their
is
money.
essentially paper money.
Yeah. You'd have an IOU, basically, and you would go and arrive in Gaza or what's the other acre, and there'd be a chapter house
Mm,
that would have your money. It's not your money, but it's the they would have a bank on one end and a bank on the other, and they would just have their treasure ships going in between.
right. Um. So I guess after that, you know, the banking kind of developed over time. The Medici's were really into banking in Italy and during the Renaissance. In fact, a lot of the Renaissance was funded through their system of banking. And then like even like in like the 1500s, like early colonization, the kings of the colonial powers would manipulate the exchange rates between gold and silver. So instead of essentially having the supply and demand dictate how much gold is worth compared to how much silver is worth, the king would say, it's worth, 15 pounds of silver is worth a pound of gold or whatever. Like they would
Uh,
set it in law, like this is the exchange rate as
right.
opposed to just the market determining. Um, so the first central bank, and which is like a bank established by the government, was the Bank of Amsterdam, which was founded in 1609. So the bank was vouched for by the city of Amsterdam. And I guess the reading that I've done on this is because at the time Amsterdam had kind of become a hub for coins that were minted all across Europe, and these coins were often debased or clipped. They wouldn't be
Yeah.
worth the face value.
Yeah, they'd be snipped out.
Right. So the bank essentially would collect these and melt them down, and based on the weight, they would start issuing paper currency. They'd give out the IOUs to people,
Right.
saying these are the banknotes, and that's what the government did essentially is um, say that these banknotes are legal tender. This is money, not you can use this in place of gold or silver. So what happened was because of this coins started flowing in more from across Europe and more money started to get printing up. So there were all these IOUs floating around um, Amsterdam and around Holland than really should have been. There was more money there than there should have been,
Yeah.
and that's actually what kind of helped spark tulip mania, which I'm sure you probably heard of.
I feel like I have.
So tulip mania was the first bubble.
That was like when they had the flower crop, right? And
Right,
everybody grew flowers because everybody wanted tulips,
right.
and then nobody wanted tulips. Or there
It,
was,
it became in vogue to have these tulips that
yeah,
was like just widely sought after. Um, so what happens is there was a large amount of speculation over it because people had all this money, so they started buying up all these tulips and trying to sell them for more. Um, but eventually, what happened was people realized that the tulips weren't worth as much as everybody was kind of pretending that they
right.
were. So the bubble burst and the economy collapsed, which is really analogous kind of to what happened in 2008
Yeah, I
with
was gonna
the
say
housing market.
housing
And
market or
yeah,
the .com.
exactly. So those are two of the most recent bubbles. Although a lot of people would say we're currently in a bubble, but
It's so great when you put it in that looking at it through that light, where you're saying like, well, who the fuck why the fuck am I paying this much for a goddamn flower,
right,
It's the same way as like, why the fuck am I paying this much for this website? Or "Well, this fucking house isn't worth this much. Like this is ridiculous." And then
right.
it
And
just blows up.
what sparks it is having all this extra money around that shouldn't be there. It's more paper currency than there is gold or silver. So there's a lot of fake money around, and uh, eventually people kind of speculate and drive the market up more than it should be. So how's it going over there?
It's good. It's good. I'm
Do
listening.
you want to take a break?
Uh,
That was the first central bank. We can pick it up. We can pick up the Bank of
all right.
England
So,
if you want to take a break.
all right, hold on. Yeah, let's take a short break. We'll be right back. We'll bust my bumpers! Hey kids, or should I say parents, it's me, Thomas the Tank Engine. Would you like to come down and spend a day with me? No? Well, your kids sure might. Come on down and spend $200, $300 on overpriced Thomas merchandise that your son or daughter will probably be tired of in 6 months after they see Chuggington or Octonauts or any other fucking kid show that's out there. But who knows? Maybe they'll be stuck until they're 13 and be really too old to see Thomas, but they'll still show up at the Data Thomas and try to cut you in line to face painting and say, "May I go here now?" And you'll look at them and say, "What?" And they'll say, "Does your son love Thomas as much as I do?" And I'll say, "Clearly not, because you're a fucking freak. It says all expenses included, but that's a pile of bullshit. Anyway, come on down a day out with Thomas at Essex Steam Trade and just waste time. Trembling tracks. You'll make memories for a lifetime. Also see Percy." So anyway, if your kid is over 3 fucking years old, it's $25. Adult prices.
Bullshit.
Right. And then it says, "Oh yeah, the guy at the booth was like, there's rides, food, photos, face painting, magic show, train tables, go nuts. Like it's all included." So we're like, "Oh, this is going to be great." We go get our picture taken with Thomas. Like, we wait in the fucking line for 20 minutes. We get up.
So when you say with Thomas, what is
Like
Thomas?
with Thomas, a life-sized Thomas the Tank Engine.
Like a train?
A
Like,
train
wow.
that looks like Thomas with a moving mouth and the whole yeah, moving mouth and eyes. Buff my bumpers. Trembling tracks. Like, it's just, hi everybody, I'm Thomas. And you're like, damn it. Rob's like, Emma?
That is fucking surreal.
I'm like, yeah, it's Thomas. And when we got closer, he was in such a state of awe. Like, his face, he just was like dumbstruck. He had nothing to say. My kid, who's usually just like, he had nothing to say. He was just like, this is fucking happening. It got real. It got really real.
It sounds pretty bizarre. I imagine.
It was. That's right. That's exactly what it was. Bizarre. There was a Percy too, and when we got his picture taken with Percy,
How many trains were? How many,
Thomas
like,
and Percy.
animatronic trains were there?
Thomas and Percy. Percy didn't talk, but his face moved, and it scared the shit out of Rob because he didn't know it was gonna happen. We got up, and he didn't hear, like, "Hey, everybody!" Like, they didn't hear the Percy voice. So when he got up, he looked back, and the fucking train started, like, the mouth started moving, and the eyes were like blinking, and he wigged out. That's why you look at the pictures, he's just huddled up all close to his dad. He was freaked out.
Mm.
But then there was a Mr. Topham hat, a dude in a Mr. Topham hat costume. And
just like kind of like a mayor costume, right? Like just a top hat and like a tuxedo or something.
no, he has like a big head, like a big cartoon.
Okay.
Mr. Topham hat, huge fat chin,
I thought maybe it'd just be
big,
like some
puffy
chubby guy.
gouty face, Mr. Topham hat. The fucking, he's in some banks. He's into banking, I'm sure. Island of Sodor Credit Union. He's got to be. He's the dude. He's Topham hat. Top hat. Top of the fucking food chain. In Island. Have you ever watched Thomas?
I saw like a little bit. Like my cousins were
Thomas-
watching it like last Christmas. or
Thomas
something.
has there's a whole other side to Thomas the Tank Engine if you're an adult when you watch it.
Really.
It's all about being a useful engine. It's extremely
There you
utilitarian.
go.
And in the Thomas books, and they mention him in the show too. Because there's steamies who are like Thomas and Percy and James and Gordon. They're steam engines, and then there's the diesels, and the diesels are
different
like
classes.
right, and the diesels fucking hate steamies, and they call them stinky steamies, and they're dirty diesels. But there's a diesel called Diesel 10, and Diesel 10 is the scrap train, and it like has a big claw that that rips up trains and destroys them. And in the books, they talk about how like the trains get eaten, like the diesels eat steamies or something. It's
Really.
right, it's something like that, or like how like they talk about how the trains get consumed, and it's kind of dark. But just the show itself is all about being useful. If you're not useful, like whenever Thomas is cheeky or goes off and does something fun, Mr. Topham Hat's very disapproving.
Oh,
He's
really?
always just like, no, you need to do your job, Thomas. Stop fucking around, Thomas.
It's a valuable lesson.
Right. So it's always like, do your work, listen to your boss, listen to the Topham Hat, do what he says, try to make Topham Hat happy. It's always about like, even the conductor guy that does the breaks between the animated shit, he's always like, oh, Mr. Topham Hat, I better keep this place clean for Mr. Topham Hat. I better bake this pie for Mrs. Topham Hat. He's always just running back and forth doing shit for Topham Hat. So that guy's just got everybody under his thumb. He's especially these train conductors for some reason.
They owe him favors.
Right. It's a very small island, apparently. But it has gold mines and mountains and shit. I don't understand. And big, like, pine forests. Or no, that's on Misty Island. There's a whole thing where there's this
There's
island.
different islands.
Yeah, there's this island called Misty Island. And the train track to it runs under the ocean. So,
Really?
right.
Like a tunnel.
Right, but they get stuck in the tunnel, right? And the only way for them to signal home is to shoot a blast of steam through the roof of the tunnel. But they're under the water. So, like,
So it
there's
goes
this
up
part
to
where
the
the
water.
trains are like, look, it's Thomas. They see, like, this puff of steam coming out from the water in between Misty Island. and they don't really show how the physics of that worked. How
Right.
Thomas,
How
who's in a
steam rises through
he's in a
water.
a submerged subterranean mine shaft to Misty Island. How he manages to because it shows like a hole with sun coming through it. He's like, "Oh, put the steam through that," but it's there's water. So I'm really concerned about what my son is watching here. Like this is completely I don't buy it for a minute. I mean, we're talking about talking
It sounds pretty
trains.
trippy. Going to that thing sounds pretty trippy. That just sounds like a mushroom trip. Like fucking
Day out with Thomas.
train talking to you.
Yeah, dude. It was cool. It was like, how remember Thompson when he did the Kentucky Derby, the whole
Yep.
like just him and Stedman walking around. It was Ralph Stedman, right?
Yep.
That he's walking around the Kentucky Derby just looking at everybody suffering or
Yep.
whatever or in complete bacchanalia. This was just like looking around. There was I got so many dads just looking at me and we're just like we all were clicking like this fucking sucks a dick right now. There's way too many people here. We got there and we wanted to get a ticket. You buy train tickets. There's one that leaves every 45 minutes. There's like
On Thomas.
yes, Thomas. Well, it's the Essex Steam train.
Right.
The real train's on the other end of the cars. The kids
Okay.
don't see it.
Right.
They think Thomas is pulling or pushing the train.
Right.
But they don't realize there's like actual real steam engine on the other end.
Gotcha.
But anyways, so we showed up to buy tickets. All the tickets were sold out. The guy at the booth, the girl said all the tickets were sold out from the moment they opened up in the morning. The tickets sold out through 4:30. So 4:30 is the last ride of the day, and that's the only ones that were left at 9:30 in the morning. Open at 9. At 9:30, all the train tickets, all the tickets for all the trains except the last train of the day were sold the fuck out. They said they've
Popular.
never seen that many people show up for a Thomas thing ever. And they've been doing them, apparently, they've done it before, and they've never seen it happen like this. Because it was the last week.
Maybe they've done it once before.
It was the last weekend, and it was really bright out. And it was nice, but it was cold as fuck, and it was windy. That's where I got this cold from.
Mm.
But yeah, you looking around, you see all these parents just all really doing their best to just be happy. And
Well, you got to make those sacrifices. I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to take me to movies that I know he hated, like Encino Man. Like I begged him to go see Encino Man, or like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Turtles in Time. I don't know if you ever saw that piece of garbage.
that's the
It's-
one where, yeah, but they could become a samurai, right?
It's
They dress up like samurais?
Yeah.
Turtles in Time is.
right. That's 3, and it's got to be one of the worst movies ever made.
I haven't seen it in such a long time. I always have like really good memories
I'm
of
sure
it.
you have many years of that kind of thing to look forward to, making those kinds of sacrifices.
Yeah, I already do. I mean, I'm down with I'm down with the Island of Sodor crew and maybe a little bit of Chuggington. We certainly watch the Octonauts a lot.
What's that?
The Octonauts is actually really cool. It's like an undersea. It's like a sea lab with a bunch of humanoid animal creatures. There's even some sort of. This is the weird one though. There's like a rabbit, like a turnip rabbit that eats vegetables or something. Like it eats carrots, but it's like a rabbit turnip.
Okay.
That's it. And there's a polar bear. The polar bear is the captain. Then like the first mate is a cat with an eye patch who's actually really badass. His name's Quasi. Then there's a penguin
Why is he a badass?
because he doesn't give a fuck. He drives Gup number 2. Gup number 2 is like a shark. They have different undersea vehicles. They're all Gup. There's like the Gup. Or no, I'm sorry, the Gup B. That's what he has. There's the Gup A, the Gup B, or the Gup C, the Gup D, and E. And they all get to drive these little vehicles. But Quasi drives, I think, Gup B, and it's like a shark. It's a one-man solo assault sort of craft. He's always mixing it up with squids or whales or sharks or whatever. He's always getting into it. I don't want to talk about Octonauts anymore. We should talk about
Okay.
banking. That's
All
why
right.
you're
Bank of
here.
England.
Back to banking.
Back to banking.
We were on the Bank of Amsterdam.
The Bank of England, which
Now moving
these
on.
guys are real jackasses. So they were founded in 1694, which is a little bit after the Bank of Amsterdam. And they were founded because William III wanted to wage war with Louis XIV. So the British government essentially needed to raise funds. So they established this bank. Um, Another interesting figure around this time was John Law. I don't know if you ever heard of John Law before.
No, I haven't.
So John Law was a Scot, and he got involved in this lovers' duel in Scotland or Britain, where he had to flee the country essentially when Scotland and England merged into the United Kingdom in 1707, I believe it was. So he had to flee to France, and he was an economist, and he was widely regarded as very smart because he would like use his knowledge of probability to win like these high profile gambling tournaments or things like that. So anyway, he kind of fell into high regard with the upper class of France, or at the in the early 18th century. So he started this bank in 1716
Okay.
called the Banque Générale, which general bank.
Right.
So he was friends with the Duke of Orleans. So after Louis XIV passed away, the Duke of Orleans, I guess, had was very influential in the French government at the time. So he helped the government kind of take over the Banque Générale, and it became the Banque Royale. So it became sponsored by the French government.
Right.
When this happened, this meant that again, like the Bank of Amsterdam, the banknotes became officially endorsed by the government, so that it meant that they were on par with gold or silver, or exchangeable for
Okay.
gold or silver. So, as ended up happening is people started using the bank. They put their gold and silver into the bank. The bank starts issuing paper money. They start issuing more paper money than they actually have in their
Right.
reserves. This is called fractional reserve banking, by the way, which means that you don't actually need as much gold and silver in your bank as you issue out.
And were they still doing speculations on like
Right. Well,
crops and stuff?
so
And there's
it, the,
still like
what
a lot of money in the sort of in the air.
Well, so this kind of ties into the school of Austrian economics, which is that when you increase the money supply, you create this kind of boom and bust cycle, these bubbles, which keep erupting throughout history. So very similar to tulip mania, that's exactly what did happen. So the Banque Générale started printing up all this money, and John Law actually was also involved with this scheme for selling or speculating on land in Mississippi, or like around the New Orleans colony.
Yep.
Um, and people started buying stock in all these companies related to this land. However, eventually, investors started realizing that these endeavors weren't really worth as much as the speculations were being valued at, similar to the tulip mania. So they went to the Banque Royale and requested all their gold and silver back. And eventually, like, the scheme was kind of unfurled that, the more paper had been issued than there was gold and silver. It was kind
Uh-huh.
of a run on the bank, where
Yeah.
the bank just can't pay back everybody because they gave out more IOUs than they actually had.
So the curtain kind of got drawn back a little.
Right. So yeah. So this John Law guy, he had to flee France. He had to dress as a woman and flee the country.
That's good.
He had to escape being hanged.
Right.
Um, but so people, just didn't learn their lesson after this endeavor. Central banks kept being established throughout Europe and different countries over time. Um,
Well, everybody wants to get rich, you know. There's got to be. They see
right,
one guy get away with it, they're like, "Well, I could do it better than him," right? So
right.
it's gonna keep happening.
Yeah, and it just keeps creating these kinds of Ponzi schemes through fractional reserve banking, and also specifically the government's influence here is kind of what we were talking about earlier about regulatory capture. Rather than having like these different competing banks, which issue their own notes, which are backed by gold and silver, they give a monopoly to one bank like the Bank Royale and say that this is money. The other banks' notes don't count.
Okay.
So it kind of gives like special treatment to them and knocks out the competitors. But anyway, so the Revolutionary War. Let's talk about American history now.
Okay.
So during the Revolutionary War, we kind of financed the war effort through printing up paper money, and a bunch of the early founding fathers, they saw the inflation that happened, and when people kind of realized during or after the war that all this paper money wasn't worth anything, they kind of realized that the U.S. shouldn't have paper money. We should have, or if we have paper money, it should be exchangeable for gold or silver. It shouldn't be just backed on the credit of the government, which is what the Revolutionary War IOUs essentially were.
Uh-huh.
So this is actually one of the first big political debates in national history was between Alexander Hamilton, who was with the Federalists, and Thomas Jefferson, who was with the Republican Democrats. And these were kind of the first two
Yeah.
factions or parties
I remember
in
this.
American history. So Alexander Hamilton, who by the way was widely accused of really being a sympathizer for King George and
Yeah, I've heard he was like a Tory.
right. The colonists would say, or at least his critics would say that even though he wanted like America to be an independent country, he wanted to be like Canada, sort of, I guess,
Yeah.
where you still regard the King of England
Right.
as the head of government, and still he wanted to model the U.S. very much after Britain. And towards that end, he wanted to create a national bank that was similar to the Bank of England.
Okay.
And this was a big rivalry between him and Thomas Jefferson because Thomas Jefferson said, "No, we don't want a national bank. We don't want the government to have debt. We don't want the people of the country to be indebted towards
Right.
this bank." Um, so Alexander Hamilton kind of politically maneuvered. He was under George Washington made the first Secretary of Treasury, and he was able to get the first Bank of the United States established in
Was he
1791.
appointed by Washington?
Yeah,
So now what does that say about Washington if he's
right.
putting this guy sort of pretty much in the perfect position to create a national bank?
Right. I think that there also was, to be fair, I think there was a compromise. I've read about this meeting between Hamilton, Jefferson, and James Madison that took place one night. Like they had like this dinner meeting, and it was regarding establishing this bank, and it was also regarding establishing Washington D.C. Because at the time, the capital, I believe, alternated between Philadelphia and New York,
Yeah.
and the Southerners really didn't like this because it was kind of, they thought, concentrating political clout in the North as opposed to where they were from. So what I was reading essentially said that Jefferson and Madison kind of agreed to go along with this bank, or to a certain extent, for having Washington be placed in Virginia, essentially,
Yep.
which kind of believe Thomas Jefferson was from Virginia.
Yeah, it's in the middle.
Yeah. Um, so anyway, so this first bank in the United States was established. The bank's charter expired in 1811, and it wasn't renewed. Um, However, the year after that, the U.S. got embroiled in the War of 1812, and this actually, by the way, is what inspires a lot of central banks, or the need for central banks, is war.
Yeah.
Constantly, it's over and over again wars. So yeah, so the government found itself in debt, and they established the second bank of the United States in 1816, and it was actually really a controversial issue at the time, and it actually ended up going to the Supreme Court in a case called McCulloch v. Maryland, and this was an important Supreme Court case because it was the first time that the Chief Justice, or the prevailing opinion, was a loose rather than strict interpretation of the Constitution. So the Constitution actually says that the government won't say that anything besides gold or silver is money. It basically says Congress shall acknowledge gold and silver as money, and it also, the 10th Amendment, says that anything that isn't specifically listed in the Constitution, the government doesn't have the power to do.
Okay.
Like the government's power is limited to what is said in the Constitution. So, in this 1819 Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court basically threw out those notions and said that the government can do anything unless the Constitution says that it can't. It's kind of turned it on its head.
Right.
So it had the opposite effect. So
Ah.
the second bank in the United States was established, and this actually was this kind of cause celeb for Andrew Jackson, who had made a name for himself during the War of 1812, during the Battle of New Orleans, and then
After the war was over,
right,
officially.
right. Um, so he kind of came out against the Bank of the United States, second Bank of the United States. He wanted to have it abolished, um, and it kind of caused this big political rift where the bank's charter was set to expire in 1836. So what the bankers wanted to do was kind of either get Andrew Jackson on their side or push him out of office through a political kind of scuffle. So they had Henry Clay force through Congress this rechartering of the bank a few months before the 1832 election,
Okay.
where Andrew Jackson essentially would have. They thought either he would have to sign this bill into law that would have rechartered the bank and would have reestablished their power, or alternatively, he would have had to veto it, which they thought would anger the public and he would not get reelected. So, what actually happened was Andrew Jackson vetoed the rechartering, um,
Okay.
and the public actually widely supported this because they didn't like the bank.
Yeah.
They thought it was
Well, he
monopolizing
was a real.
power.
Would he have been considered a populist? I always viewed him as sort of a
Yeah,
populist.
essentially.
Didn't he have? Was he was the one that had his inauguration party? He just invited a bunch of people. He's
Right,
like,
it
just
was
come
like
on
it
down.
was like a wild drunken orgy, essentially.
Old Hickory.
Yeah. Um,
You got it.
I got it.
Happens to everybody.
So, then you had sound effects for that normally? It's like, you could add some like curly sound effects. What happened was Andrew Jackson vetoed this, and the public supported him, and he got reelected in 1832. So the bank was abolished, and the this kind of ushered in what's called the free banking era, which is that like I was saying earlier, all these other banks could issue their own currency backed by gold or silver, but the federal government wouldn't endorse any one bank. So, in modern times, it's worth noting that this is widely regarded as a bad thing because there was a panic in 1837, and this is kind of blamed on Andrew Jackson for doing this. But there are actually a couple different dynamics that happen here. So, similar to the National Bank of or the Bank of Amsterdam and the Bank Royale, the second bank of the United States have been printing up all this money that it didn't actually have in gold or silver. So it was making more money in the money supply. So what happens when you do that? Essentially, what you're doing is it's kind of like when somebody gets addicted to like heroin, where they feel good. They keep doing the drug. They feel
Yeah.
great. They feel great, but they're addicted to heroin. And so similarly, the country becomes addicted to this fake money that doesn't really exist,
Okay.
and to kind of even things out and get you back down to the actual monetary level, which is the amount of gold and silver, you have to go through this withdrawal or deflation.
Yeah.
So it's a
That's what happened.
it's a
That's what.
bust. It's necessary to get things back to the way they should be. So that's one reason why this happened. Another is the Bank of England were investors in the second bank in the United States,
Ah.
and they were kind of pissed off by this. So what they did is they raised interest rates, which means that the bank will pay more for for these for gold and silver. So what that kind of did is draw funds from the United States to the Bank of England, and
Motherfuckers.
that freezed up credit. It means people couldn't get loans, and yeah, just kind of it made the
How were people so stupid back then? Like they just didn't see this.
well, it's
People in the know, like, oh, who's your partner? The Bank of fucking England. Like, did we just fight a war with them? Didn't they
two.
just didn't they just come and burn our fucking White House down? Why are we what? Like, why? What? Whatever.
That well, no,
Collusion.
that was actually part of what Andrew Jackson's pitch against the Bank of the United States was the second Bank of the United States. He said that not only is it concentrating wealth, it's also owned by these foreign powers, and these foreign powers shouldn't have influence over the American people. The American people
Absolutely
should
not.
govern their own finances. Um, so after this panic, or after the Bank of the United States was gone, there was about a 20-year period. It's called the free banking era in the U.S., and that lasted up until the Civil War. And during the Civil War, again, the government needed money to fight and win the war,
Right.
so they started printing up greenbacks, which is like the Civil War. Or I'm sorry, like the Revolutionary War money, just this paper money that's backed by government debt, government bonds. Um, and they also established a kind of national banking system where they endorsed banks throughout the country.
Right.
So it was kind of like an in between of the way things were right before the war and the way things were before Andrew Jackson. Um, so after the Civil War ended, there arose this debate in the U.S. between whether we should continue on the gold and silver standard, the bimetallic standard, using both as money, or just using gold as money. And this was a big rivalry in the last quarter of the 19th century between the Republicans and the Democrats. It was like the main issue. So 1873, silver was demonetized. The government essentially said it's not money anymore. Only gold is money, and this had a negative effect on poor farmers and people in the South.
Yeah, sure.
Um, Silver has a quality of being more inflationary, meaning that more comes into circulation than comes into gold. People find more silver mines and find gold mines.
Right.
It's more plentiful. Um, so yeah, so this is what the election of 1896 was about, which I think you brought up earlier.
Well, I
Um,
brought up the crime of '73,
right, and well, that's
and
that's
I
the
also I was hoping we were going to touch on this, but when exactly did that guy take a shot at Andrew Jackson? Because
oh yeah,
you didn't mention how there was an assassination attempt on Old Hickory
yeah, that was during
that may or
well
may
that
not have had something to do with the fucking bank getting
yeah
closed
that I
down.
mean that thing that whole ordeal was like during his whole second term. So
Yeah, but I mean, come on, right there in American history. Here's an example. Here's the first example, you guys. If you want to make a chronology of presidents,
mm,
he's at least the first one that was openly there was an open assassination attempt on him that may or may not, right, from what you were telling me last year, have
mm.
had something to do with the bank. It certainly was at
Well,
a.
he
It was such a certain coincidences were
the
happening.
rhetoric around that time was really high. I mean, Andrew Jackson is he had a famous quote. It was he said, he directed this quote towards the banks. He said, "You are a den of vipers and thieves. I have
From
determined
the
to
Bible.
rout you out, and by the eternal I will rout you out." So
Vipers and thieves. That's definitely quoting. He's paraphrasing Jesus
right.
throwing the money changers out of the temple.
So there was definitely a lot of
But you win. But
heavy
he
rhetoric.
knows. But he knows.
Yeah.
He understands. He's a. Did he fight in the Revolutionary War as well?
I think it was a little before his time. He
Okay,
fought. He fought in the War
but
of
he fought in the
1812.
War of 1812, and then of course in between that he served in the military right before the 18 War of 1812. I thought he was in the
Killed some Indians.
Sure, why not? Everybody was doing it back then.
But I mean, he wasn't perfect. But yeah, he definitely realized that the concentration of wealth in these banking systems via government power, via government empowering this private corporation was a bad thing, and the government indebting the American people and the American taxpayer to this banking
Right.
institution is a bad thing, and that's why he abolished it.
Yeah.
So,
1830 what? 1836?
he well, again, it was stupid. They took a gamble and were wrong. They tried to get him to sign the law to recharter it in 1832, and he said, "Fuck that! I'm not doing that. Screw you
Yeah.
guys." And yeah, they kind of signed their own death warrant with that.
So 1832
Yeah,
was when they
and
wised up.
right. Uh,
Anyway, so we were back to the election of the crime of 73.
Crime of 73 demonetized silver. This kind of gradually over time became more and more of an issue where in the election of 1896, this is a pretty interesting election too, because nowadays what are elections about? It's we had like the 2004 election about the Iraq war,
Yep.
or 2000 election about
Gay
the
marriage.
lockbox. Oh yeah, the gay marriage. So,
Gay
all
marriage.
these kind of different issues. So it's interesting to think that in 1896, the whole election was about monetary policy. It was about,
Wow, how appropriate.
yeah, McKinley said McKinley was in favor of the gold standard, and William Jennings Bryan was in favor of bimetallic gold and silver standard. And what's actually interesting, very interesting for me, I imagine probably you also as a kid were a fan of the Wizard of Oz.
Right. I was
Um,
hoping you were going to go here.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So, The Wizard of Oz was originally written by L. Frank Baum in 1900, and it was about in the 1900 election. Actually, was a repeat of the 1896 election. It was the same. It was again.
Same platform.
It was the same. It was supposed to be the same issues, and it was the same. It was William McKinley against William Jennings
We've
Bryan.
had all these elections recently they've all seemed like
Yeah.
that anyway. So
So, the book kind of was about both elections, but in the original book, Dorothy's slippers aren't ruby. They did that for the movie because that's when Technicolor came out, so they thought it
yeah,
would be interesting. In the original book, her slippers are silver, and the whole book is actually a monetary analogy about these elections. So Dorothy, so you have Dorothy's slippers, right? They're silver, and the
right.
yellow brick road is gold, and Dorothy's supposed to represent America in this, and what he's trying to say is that the way home is this bimetallic standard. He was supporting William Jennings Bryan, was saying you need gold and silver to have things function. And actually, the trip from her trip to the Emerald City, which is representative of Washington D.C., and then trying to get back to Kansas, is actually it was a march that happened, I believe, in 1896 of these poor farmers who marched from Kansas City to Washington on this. They called it a free silver platform, which is for the bimetallic standard. But yeah, the whole book is all about it. The Cowardly Lion is actually supposed to represent William Jennings Bryan. He was often described as a lion. They called him the Cowardly Lion because they thought in the election of 1900 he was backing away from these issues, and he kind of needed to be pulled back towards them. Um, and like the Tin Man represented industrial workers, the Scarecrow represented farmers, um, and
Farmers have no brain.
right, and like the witches represented like different like industrial powers. So there was a Wicked Witch of the East and the Wicked Witch of the West, right?
Yeah, the Wicked West Witch of the East got crushed by the house.
Right. So these are supposed to represent Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel. Um, So it was very analogous. It's just an interesting thing because I think many of us grew up loving that movie and not knowing that it's actually a monetary allegory. Um,
That's cool. That's very cool.
so what this effectively did is it created this big monetary debate in the U.S. where people were very concerned about monetary policy. In 1907, there was a panic on Wall Street. It happened in October, which is funny because these panics always seem to happen in like September or October.
Right before winter.
This is a strange coincidence. Um,
It's right before winter.
but yeah, it had a couple different causes. The Bank of England again raised interest rates right around that time. Um, the, the government also raised its bond deposit requirement. So there was this run on Wall Street again where credit freezed up. People couldn't get loans. People couldn't get their money out of the bank. It was also precipitated also by the San Francisco earthquake, which happened in 1906, and a lot of money from insurers had to flow out to make those payouts. So people again got more concerned about monetary policy. In November of 1910, a bunch of American financiers met in Jekyll Island off the coast of. It's a great name, isn't it?
Jekyll. Yeah.
Just
There's
like,
nothing nefarious happening here on Jekyll Island.
yeah, right. Just in the shape of a skull.
Yeah.
But yeah, they met on Jekyll Island. Actually, they
Jekyll fucking Island.
on their way traveling there. They used assumed names, so like it was very secretive, and like they represented J.P. Morgan and these other powerful banking houses. And what their conclusion was is they wrote essentially what became the Federal Reserve Act, which is saying that the government needs to establish this private bank, needs to endorse us as the Bank of the United States again. So, effectively, the Federal Reserve is really
we need to resurrect,
the third bank of the United States.
right.
So they draft this up. Aldrich, I believe Senator Aldrich is the one who helped endorse this and put this in Congress.
Okay.
In the election of 1912, the bankers backed Woodrow Wilson. They gave him their support in exchange for him promising to help pass this law.
Yeah.
So December 23rd of 1913, which is one day before Christmas Eve,
Right.
when most of the Congress is gone on the Christmas holiday, they shove this thing through Congress.
Yeah. I recall this, but keep going.
They shoved this thing through Congress the same exact day, not even like a day later or a week later. Woodrow Wilson signs it into effect, and so the Federal Reserve Act becomes law, and that's how we have the Federal Reserve today. It's like I said, the third bank of the United States, essentially.
Earlier, when we were discussing podcasts, my favorite podcasts, I neglected to mention my real favorite historical podcast because there's droughts between episodes. Each episode takes like 6 months for these guys because they're like 4-hour episodes. They're crazy long episodes, but it's called Hardcore History. This guy, Dan Carlin. And they are, if you want to, seriously, I'll recommend them. I recommend it to you.
Okay.
Over any other podcast because there's enough material there for you to listen to. Oh, sure. Certainly. You like history, right?
Obviously.
Yeah. You need to check this guy out. Hardcore History. He does like 5-part series, did a 5-part series on the Mongols. He has an ongoing series right now on World War One. He's been doing for over like probably a year now or so, maybe more. I think it's 4 months between episodes.
Really? That's a long time.
He's been doing it like I think it's almost been 2 years he's been doing this for this World War One shit. But anyways, they're really, really good episodes. But he talks about Wilson a lot.
Yeah.
And
that was a very important time in US history. That's when the IRS got established, and the FBI and like all like these like progressive like initiatives to like empower the government more than it had been previously. That all happened in this,
I'm trying
1908 to 1914 type, right before World War One period.
I'm trying to remember. I wish I want to listen to these things just again so I can hear him talk about Wilson. But he had this quote from a diplomat who had a discussion between like Neville Chamberlain, right? Was it not Neville Chamberlain? Not Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain was World War II, right?
Yeah, he was the prime minister of.
I'm trying to remember the prime minister of Britain during.
You got me on that one.
Yeah. I would have known his name if I had just heard it. I would have known his name, but it was the prime minister of Britain and Wilson, and he said it was like having a talk between just, a guy and fucking Jesus. He was like, Wilson was like Jesus. Like it was like dealing with like a political sage, like a guy who was just.
Well, he actually a
really supreme politician.
He actually, hey Steve, he actually he had a quote. Wilson had a quote later where he lamented signing this bill. But is it all right if we take another quick break? Just one last quick break.
Sure.
All right, let's do that, and then I'll have that quote for you when we come back.
Okay.
Action Team 8 News with your lead anchor, Jed Rivers.
Rumble and on-site correspondent Brad Dorskin.
Welcome back to Action Team 8. This is Chet Rimble, and we are just receiving some word in the studio here that presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has undergone multiple sex changes. Getting further information on this, we're going to cut to Brad Dorskin at the Clinton campaign headquarters down in New York. Brad, are you there?
I'm here, Chet. This is Brad Dorskin, Action Team 8 here at Clinton campaign headquarters, reporting live. Am I coming in clear?
Yes, you are, Brad. What is this we're hearing about Hillary Clinton receiving multiple gender change operations?
Amazing developments down here at Clinton campaign headquarters. Brilliant strategy revealed to the public here. Clinton has covered all the bases. All the bases. She not only has gone woman to man sex change operation, but has completed the operation, healed up, and has now reverted back to female status, but has ended up in some sort of sexual limbo where she is neither man nor woman, but is considered transgender, now covering all the genders and orientations of the Democratic Party.
Interesting, Brad. One wonders what effect this is going to have on the 2016 election. Have you heard anything from the voters down there at Clinton campaign headquarters?
People are feeling confident, but even further developments have brought in some Republican voters into the fold. McDonnell Douglas and Boeing have partnered to turn Hillary Clinton's vagina into a micro-drone factory. So she will now, not only if she becomes president of the United States, will she be commander-in-chief, but she will also be the drone mother of our entire federal security network.
So some kind of hive queen where drones emerge from her vagina.
Exactly. And I've heard rumors in the works of some sort of air-based helicarrier with Patriot missiles on call, ready to strike anywhere her vagina spore drones mark. And that really is phenomenal.
Well, this is certainly an interesting development. Have we heard anything from former President Bill Clinton on this matter?
No, but I'm sure he is terrified for his life because of all his philandering and lascivious activities.
Well, thank you, Brad. We will certainly follow this story. And next up, the weather.
In 1998, the United States also changed its underlying policy toward Iraq from containment to regime change and began to examine options to effect such a change, including support for Iraqi opposition leaders within the country and abroad. In the 4 years since the inspectors left, intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists, including al-Qaeda members. It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons. Should he succeed in that endeavor, he could alter the political and security landscape of the Middle East, which, as we know all too well, affects American security. This is a very difficult vote. This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Any vote that might lead to war should be hard. But I cast it with conviction. And perhaps my decision is influenced by my 8 years of experience on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, in the White House, watching my husband deal with serious challenges to our nation. I want this president, or any future president, to be in the strongest possible position to lead our country in the United Nations or in war. Secondly, I want to ensure that Saddam Hussein makes no mistake about our national unity and for our support for the President's efforts to wage America's war against terrorists and weapons of mass destruction. And thirdly, I want the men and women in our armed forces to know that if they should be called upon to act against Iraq, our country will stand resolutely behind them.
I'll walk you back in. Take my hand. We have arrived from our break. We're back.
So yeah, I just looked up that quote. There's actually a couple other good quotes I found here too. Thomas Jefferson, if we can go back earlier. Thomas Jefferson had a good one here. I just want to mention. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people whom it properly belongs.
Yep.
He also said, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. So there's some good Thomas Jefferson quotes.
Yeah, because the banking, who's outfitting the standing army?
Right. Exactly.
It's the arms
And
company.
I kind of skipped over the whole Rothschild thing, but yeah, he financed
He sold guns to both sides. He sold guns to all sides.
well, his brothers. That's how the Rothschilds gained power. Is they essentially had this banking network. They manipulated the market in different. They manipulated different markets because they would talk to each other and say, "Oh, what's the price of gold in Paris? What's the price of gold in London? What's the price of gold in Germany?" And they would make profits off of that essentially. But yeah, they had an influence on what happened with defeating Napoleon at Waterloo.
right.
And also
Yeah.
getting the word. They also got word of the outcome of Waterloo before the British government did, and were able to influence markets in London days before the British government even knew what happened in
Yeah.
Waterloo. But
I believe that.
yeah, so that's, I guess, just proving what Jefferson said. But yeah, what I was trying to look up here was so Wilson, yeah, I guess kind of a jackass, or bought and paid for, like every politician, just sells their soul to the devil essentially.
He was the devil.
Right. Well,
He had aspirations higher than,
well,
just
he got elected because he said to these bankers, I will help you get a monopoly on the US currency, on our banking system. Just help me win the election, essentially, and that's what happened. But years later,
he got
he-
reelected, right? He served 2 terms, didn't he?
yeah,
He got reelected for staying out of the war.
he got reelected and staying out of the war.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They were in the war like within the year after he got elected.
I mean, it depends how. Yeah, they were, and it also depends how like conspiracy theorists you want to go. There's also people who say that talk about how Lusitania being sunk, and that the Germans were warning that it was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of like similar to like
How FDR was warned by the
yeah,
intelligence that
very
was in
similar.
Pearl Harbor. How the U.S. government was warned that there was with intelligence that there was going to be an attack on New York City.
Yep. So years later,
Relax, it's fine. Those are our friends.
Wilson, he had this quote. He said, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of a majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Which, yeah, there you go.
Right on the money.
So
From the man himself, the architect of the League of Nations.
right.
You gotta wonder, what the fuck are they talking about? Like, when he says shit like that, I'm like, aren't you the fucking guy? Weren't you weren't
Again,
you
I mean,
involved?
you sell your soul, and then I'm sure people can regret
Because
it
Kennedy
later.
had the same sort of, Kennedy made the same sort of speeches.
Do you remember the 2008 election? I still recall Barack Obama giving some very inspirational speeches in the lead up to that election.
Yeah, well, you know what I heard? A bunch of bullshit, because I stopped caring after Kerry Bush.
Yeah.
After Kerry Bush, I was like, this is fucking busted. Like, this doesn't make sense.
Mm.
Nobody wants this dude to be. Nobody I know wants this fucking guy to be president.
Right.
Okay,
I
I
am
live
yet-
in the Northeast.
I am yet to find someone who likes Hillary Clinton. Can you please show me one human being?
Not this guy.
Who I can't. Find
I've stated this. I've stated it publicly on this show. Fuck Hillary Clinton.
And that's actually, by the way, that's how Barack Obama got elected in that primary. I don't know
Who
if you
what the
recall,
fuck wants to vote for Hillary
because
Clinton?
nobody wanted Hillary Clinton.
Putting
so-
fucking penis cookies up on her Christmas tree. She first moved into the White House. Fucking whack job, man.
I'm just
She
saying.
killed Vince Foster. No, Vince Foster in Whitewater. I never forget. Never forget the Clintons. People out there. We're all the same age, but we all grew up with this shiceball as our president. That's why everybody is so shisty. Everybody you know that's a townie or something. That's why we're all shiceballs. Because if our president can get away with getting his fucking dick sucked and lying and killing people and doing
yeah, too
drugs,
covered up. I don't know
doing
if-
drugs. His brother Roger was smuggling drugs in Arkansas. They killed a bunch of kids who found a cocaine drop. They knew about that shit.
And what people often forget is that we bombed Iraq in 1998 during the Lewinsky scandal.
Bombed Iraq.
To distract.
Bombed Sudan.
Yeah.
Bombed Bosnia. Kosovo. Afghanistan. Fucking Kenya,
But like
probably, right?
Yeah.
After the embassy and then the U.S. Was USS Cole during Bush or was that during Clinton?
It was right around.
I know the
change.
embassy was during Clinton.
I think it was 2000. So under
They
Clinton.
bombed. They fucking Patriot missile that pharmaceutical factory in Sudan
Yeah.
that was making fucking anti-venoms and vaccines
In
and shit.
'98, I remember watching footage of when we bombed them, and again, it was important because it was right during the Lewinsky scandal. It was it's when the political pressure was heating up. It's well, we got to bomb Iraq now for some
Wag
reason,
the dog.
right? So I remember seeing videos of grain factories in Iraq being bombed. Why are we bombing
Fucking
grain
blow 'em up,
factories?
man.
But yeah.
And who and all the other shit, all the domestic stuff was all under Clinton.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a trend, and I
fucking
think
Waco and Ruby Ridge and
it's been a
Oklahoma
trend,
City.
and I think it's been more. It's been precipitous over time. I think maybe, especially starting around Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, I think, definitely influenced a lot of, like I said, these government mechanisms that we still have with us today. So the Federal Reserve was a big one. They influenced the money supply, like we're talking about with the Bank of Amsterdam and the Banque Royale and the Bank of England and the second bank in the United States. They printed up more money than they had. They call it liquidity. You put more money into the market than there is, and that's what caused the Roaring '20s. So the market likes it when this is happening. So everybody thinks, yeah, this is great. Everything's fine. Everybody has everything they want. The economy's growing. The Dow's going up. This is great. What happens is eventually it's unsustainable and the bubble bursts. People realize that it's fraudulent. There's more investment than there actually is value in the market. So the bubble burst. That's what happened in 1929, causing the Great
that's what
Depression.
happened in the Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
So is the Great Gatsby is that what it's kind of about too? Is F. Scott Fitzgerald kind of?
I don't know if it's about the Federal Reserve,
But is he comparing the financial system to
Yeah.
Gatsby?
well, yeah. I mean that represents the Roaring '20s, right? And that definitely it did come to an end.
Nobody showed up to mourn.
But what's interesting about the Great Depression is not only did the Federal Reserve cause it, and the Bank of England actually played a role too, but they made it a lot worse than it had to be. So similar to I was saying with the Panic of 1837, where not only was it the deflation that had to happen, the Bank of England also raised interest rates. The Federal Reserve and the Bank of England in 1929 kept all this gold out of the market. They essentially wasn't letting it get out into the market. They were keeping it in their vaults.
Yeah.
And that
Controlling the supply.
right. So that froze up credit more. People couldn't get loans. People couldn't get money. That made the Great Depression worse than it needed to be. And it got to the point where after FDR was elected, he actually was confiscating gold from the American public. There was an executive order that was passed
What?
in 1933, Executive Order 6102, which made private ownership of gold illegal.
What?
So yeah, people had to go in and turn in their gold supplies to the federal government.
Wow. That happened during FDR?
Yeah, that was like the first year of
That
his
needs to
presidency.
be taught in high school.
No, we don't need to talk about that.
We should. That should be talked about in high school.
That's what I'm saying is I find this very interesting because I've been interested in politics for as long as I can remember, but only the past couple of years can I really remember really thinking about banking, and how it actually has a very real
Because you're
influence on all of
you're
these
attending an upper crust school,
real
man.
world events that we actually we don't usually draw the relationship between. Um, so we still after that still had a quasi gold standard. It wasn't it wasn't so much that you could go into the bank and ask for your paper money to be exchanged for gold, but this Bretton Woods system, which was established during World War II, meant that internationally countries could exchange dollars for gold. France actually did this a lot, I believe, under de Gaulle in the '60s. They had cash reserves, they had cash from the U.S. and they'd bring it to the U.S. government and say, "Give us gold," and they end up getting a bunch of gold back.
Huh.
So the government, again, Vietnam, another war, the government racked up a bunch of debt. Um, and they realized that the Bretton Woods system that they established during World War II, they couldn't finance anymore. They couldn't keep paying out this gold to these foreign countries. So on August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon says, "We're not doing it anymore. Like, just fuck you guys.
Yeah.
we're done with that."
Okay.
So that effectively ended the gold standard. Since 1971, there's been no relationship between the U.S. dollar and gold. It just today, if you look at old money, it actually says United States note, and sometimes it'll be a silver certificate with a blue stamp. You can find older notes that actually are gold certificates.
Really?
Where you could, yeah. The idea was, and it was a gradual
It was
movement over time.
worth a dollar amount in gold and silver.
Yeah, you could actually get that at the bank. But now we're backed by debt. We all owe the Federal Reserve money as American citizens. We have a national debt to the Federal Reserve, who's printed out all this money and all the cash, every dollar bill that you have is debt. That's actually debt that
It
taxpayers
says Federal
owe.
Reserve note too, right?
Right. That's a promise to pay with interest that the government has issued to the Federal Reserve. So we're taxed. When we're taxed, a large portion of our taxes go to not just funding the government, which always, or almost always since Clinton, runs at a deficit, which means that we're constantly adding to the debt. We now owe $17 trillion in debt. But we of the national budget, the yearly budget, I believe around 14% is interest that we're paying on the debt that we owe.
Wow.
So like 14 cents out of every dollar that you pay in taxes goes to the interest, the money that the bankers are making off of the debt that you owe to them.
This makes my head hurt.
Yeah.
That's bullshit.
Yeah. And you know what sucks too is inflation. As they print, they basically print up as much money as they want, which they print up money to finance the debt. So like I said, the government debt has been going up. We owe like 17 trillion in the U.S. I think in Britain, I was trying to find the figures for both countries. Britain owes about 1.5 billion pounds. But yeah, so they increase the money supply too to finance this debt, which lowers the value of a dollar because the more that you have of something, the less valuable it is. So the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. A dollar today is worth what 4 cents would have been. 4 cents in 1914 money is worth what $1 is today.
Wow.
Like that's how much deflation has happened. And if you look since 1971. Actually, that's the thing about the 70s too. This 1970s in the U.S. was kind of characterized by heavy inflation. That's because we moved off of the gold standard. So yeah, if you just look from 1971, one $1 today is worth what like 18 cents would have been worth
Wow.
back in
Holy shit,
1971.
man. It's pretty bad.
Just because they're printing up money, so the value of the money is worth less. So if you're trying to save money, let's say in 1971 you put $1 million in a vault, right? And you're like, I'm gonna hold this for 44 years, and then when I retire, I'll have this $1 million to retire on. So it's not worth $1 million anymore in 1971 money. It's worth 180,000. You know,
Wow.
you've lost the money and you haven't done anything. It's just the fact
So
that
is that like a decrease of 90% or right?
yeah,
Or
right. Yeah, just because the government is just the Federal Reserve, the government sponsored monopoly is printing up money. So also, like we're saying, they call the issue for the economy or the market is that they create these boom and bust cycles. So you talked about the two most recent ones, the .com bubble and the housing market bubble,
yeah.
which is again they're caused by all this extra liquidity in the market, just like the other booms that we talked about. So people have less extra money. These websites come out, people start buying them up. Then they realize it's not worth as much as they thought it was. The bubble burst. Same thing happened with the with the housing market. And what the funny thing is when this happens, the government just responds by doing more of the same. So a lot of people would say that we're currently actually in another bubble, whether it's a student loan bubble or whether
Yeah.
it's some people say it's the dollar itself. Eventually, people are going to realize that because it's not backed by gold or silver, that the dollar is completely
Yeah, I
worthless.
think that it's the dollar as well.
Yeah.
That's sort of
Really, to tell you the truth, the thing is that people indebt themselves to when with all this extra liquidity in the market that they put there, people get more in debt. So student loan debt, you have companies who get themselves in debt, and then they finance all of these um, investments that they undertake with their corporate debt. The government itself is in debt. That's why we have these big. That's why we had a government shutdown. I think it was last year or the year
right.
before last. It's because we're running at $17 trillion. Like, how are we ever going to pay that back? How? Where is the country going to come up with $17 trillion?
It was funny because didn't we had a surplus under Clinton? They claimed that we had a surplus under Clinton.
We had a here's the
It was
distinction.
balanced.
Here's the distinction. It's important. So you hear about the deficit and then the debt. The deficit and the debt are two different things.
Okay.
The deficit is the year relates to how much we're running under for the year. So under Clinton, we had a couple of surpluses, which I believe was actually because of him selling public airspace or leasing public airspace to the telecom companies or something like that. But regardless, we had like a couple of years of surplus, which is where the government brought in more tax money than it spent. Okay.
Yeah.
But the government by that point had already had a few $1 trillion in debt.
Okay.
And, we can use that little bit of surplus that we had in those years towards the debt, but we still owe
Yeah.
trillions of dollars to debt,
Right.
largely to the Federal Reserve, and to other central banks around the world, like the Bank of England. So I mean that could be the next bubble. Maybe it's the dollar. Maybe people just realize it's not worth anything, and then the whole system goes out the window. That would that'd be the argument from a few different perspectives that I've heard, at least. But I mean, it's definitely happened in history. That's what I think the most prominent example is they talk about the Weimar the Marks that happened in Germany.
And the Weimar Republic.
Yeah, after World War One, like they just printed up money. I thought I had some facts and figures here, but yeah.
I know it was something about like 10,000 marks for a loaf of bread or something like that, right?
In July 1914, and here we go. In July 1914, $1 US was worth 4 German marks. Okay, so a German mark was worth like 25 cents. In November 1923, so 9 years later, that same dollar was worth well over 4 trillion marks.
It's insane.
Yeah, because they just printed up money. So that's what happens when you increase the money supply. You cause prices to rise, like with the speculation with the tulip mania, and then it's unsustainable in the long run. Eventually, the whole system just collapses, and you have to start over, which is actually what happened in Germany. They had to create a new mark. So maybe someday we'll have to create a new dollar because the one that we have,
So it creates too much demand,
it creates.
gives people too much money, puts too much demand on things, so they have to raise the price in order to compensate.
So it's like, I don't know. It's like a game of poker or something. I guess if you had like a set number of chips, like if you got more chips, you would bet more, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, you
the
bully
nominal
people.
value of
You
the
bully.
bet would
I've
go up.
seen it many times.
Right. So yeah. So essentially, the government can just keep buying in for more, keep getting its credit line increased. I mean, imagine like if you had a credit card and you know you had $1,000 in your credit card, so you're like, all right, well, I have to allot this to these things. I have to be responsible. See how I can use this. Then just imagine it got up to like $10,000. It's like, well, I can spend all kinds of shit. So
Absolutely. Sky's the limit.
right. So again, I just personally think it's unsustainable in the long run. And I just find these issues interesting. I think that if people kind of investigated them a bit more, I don't know, we could have some better political debate, I think. I'm really into politics, and I'm disappointed with our current level of political discourse because, especially with like partisanship, like people, I'm sure you see, I get into debates sometimes on Facebook with people who
I
think,
try to stay out of it now.
I mean, it's not anyone, it's both parties. Like they just think that this one party has all the solutions and that the other party is completely wrong, and they don't realize that they're both complacent in this or complicit in this larger system of defrauding the American people
Yeah.
out of all their
It's
wealth.
the whole thing has to come down. Like
Right.
it's not just the two-party system. It's everything. It's just the whole thing. It's just got to stop. We need to do over. We need to do something else.
But see, the problem is, I think, is even our semantics, right? So like 2008, we had the Wall Street crash, and then we had the bailout. We had the government bailout,
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs, and all these people. And people were pissed.
I know. I just couldn't believe my eyes when that was happening.
Everyone was pissed. But then the problem is, you have these old white middle class people who are like, "This is socialism," and socialism, and then they start the Tea Party.
Yeah.
Then you
Tea
have all
Party.
like these young workers and students who say this is capitalism and capitalism. But
Right.
we're using these semantics which are really archaic and don't really apply to our current system, because we don't have socialism or capitalism. We have corporatism.
Yeah.
It's a
It's a
partnership.
corporatocracy.
Right. It's a partnership of government and corporations. Like I was saying earlier,
It's
with
kind of like
regulatory capture.
Is it kind of like a plutarchy?
Yeah,
Or an
sure.
oligarchy?
Crony capitalism, corporate warfare,
Nepotism.
corporate socialism, state capitalism, whatever you want to
Corporate
call it.
fascism?
Right. It's a partnership between money and power. That's what it is. So we think about it in these semantic terms where, oh, well, I'm a capitalist. I hate those Democrats and their socialism.
Right.
Or, well, I don't like capitalism, so I don't like those Republicans, and I'll support
Sure.
democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders. And we get into like these like paradigms and these little boxes in our mind where we're fighting each other when we don't really see
Yeah.
that these people are fucking everyone over
Yeah.
and making us debt slaves forever and our children debt slaves permanently.
I remember catching a little twinge of that at that rest stop when those kids asked. Remember when we went out down to Washington? Those guys asked me like, "So you're a Republican?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm registered as a Republican." Remember him? That kid?
Sorry, I don't. I'm actually a registered Republican.
So am I. That's what I told him. We're
Mm.
like, "Yeah, I'm registered as a Republican." Gave me a funny look. What, I can't have an opinion?
Mm.
And I did it for extra credit. Mrs. Holian told me I think she gave me extra credit if I register Republican, so I did. That's really what it came down to. It's nothing else other than that.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it stayed to this day.
I don't think it matters too much
No, it
as
doesn't.
what
It doesn't
you
fucking matter at
register
all.
as, but I don't know.
If anything, it
Eh,
might keep me off some lists.
I actually, I had a membership card to the like a Republican Party member card for a
Yeah,
while.
dude.
I'm gonna hold this in my wallet in case I need it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you never know.
but I mean, it's no different, and it's funny too because people change their views about like think about the Democrats who are all against the war, and again like all pro civil liberties and all this crap back during the Bush administration, and
But
then
they're not though. They say that they are, but they're also for like a lot of sweeping like social legislation stuff that like stifles free speech.
yeah,
Like a
that's
lot
true.
of that comes from the left. Like a lot of like freedom of expression and you know sort of lawsuit
Well,
based politics all
here's
comes out of the left, man.
here's the problem. I think is that people think that they can use government power to kind of protect themselves. So you can see this on both sides of the aisle.
And vindicate
So
themselves.
like let's start with with the Christian, let's say Christian conservatives, like
Okay.
right wing
Let's go
Christians.
back to the Bush era.
Like I know there's a sentiment among right wing Christian conservatives in this country that based on biblical prophecy, the government is going to repress them at some time. So
and is actively repressing them.
so okay, maybe that could happen, and they should.
Especially under this current president.
And so they could. But everyone should be concerned about being repressed by government. But the bullshit logic that they use is, oh, I'm afraid of Muslims. Like Muslims are dangerous. We need to keep an eye out for them.
Right.
We need to.
But what can you
Subvert
do?
civil liberties and spy on them and empower the NSA and all these tools to empower the government, make the government power than it has been in the past to spy on a religious group, which is exactly what you were afraid of happening to you. Like the logic just doesn't apply.
Right.
And same thing with you go to the other side of the aisle, liberal Democrats that they're afraid of rich people influencing the marketplace, manipulating the marketplace to empower themselves. So what do? They want the government to have more control over the marketplace,
Right.
legally, which then corporations lobby the government to benefit themselves. They don't understand that. They create these laws, they create these powers artificially that didn't exist that just make the situation worse for themselves in the long run.
Fucking black magic. What it is. It's just black magic. It's just it's a web of artifice. That's all it is. You know?
Mm.
And it just needs to come down. All this overthinking and the consternation and all of it. It can stop. It's very simple.
Well, I would hope that
Just need
people
to shut the fucking lights off.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
I'm hopeful.
I'm not advocating terrorism. I'm just saying, like, we need a fucking reality check, man. And it's gonna. And if these cycles of bubbles keep happening, and I feel that the dollar could be next because plenty of people would be much happier.
I don't know if
going back to bartering.
If I personally had to guess, I don't think that would be the next step. I think we're going through another cycle of the Federal Reserve will have to raise interest rates eventually, like it did in 2006.
We
and
could
then
have an
the market
entertainment crash.
Will collapse again, essentially. But I don't know. I'm kind of hopeful of our generation. I mean, I know, a lot of our friends are, just people our age that I know. They seem skeptical of the system generally, or of the two-party system, or old ideologies. I mean, there are a couple exceptions, one prominent one I can think of, but generally speaking, I think people are kind of skeptical of, government power and corporate power and using these old labels and these old paradigms.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, present company included there, sir.
So I don't know. Maybe in the long run will be the solution to the problem.
Perhaps, but people need to educate themselves about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s then and realize that we cannot make the same mistakes that the baby boomers made because they pretty much
that's the thing too. Like, so we spent this whole show going over hundreds of years of history.
Yeah.
So, it's if you learn from history and you can draw the parallels, you can avoid the consequences that our forefathers have suffered and stop the the system of oppression that they have also burdened us with their own mistakes.
Yeah. I'd like to quickly mention that Avril Harriman and J.P. Morgan Chase and several other luminaries of the banking and industrial system
Sponsored this show tonight.
at one time colluded with a Marine Corps general to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II, and tried to overthrow FDR and institute a fascist-style dictatorship in the United States. And Avril Smedley Butler, the Marine Corps general, turned them all in for traitors. And for some reason, they weren't put in jail and executed. And Prescott Bush's great-grandson went on to become the president of the United States and get us into the Iraq conflict. And, his dad was also a real big-time player in the CIA and had a lot to do with the Bay of Pigs invasion and or the Kennedy assassination and everything else that went on throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, including probably a lot of the drug trafficking in South and Central America. He certainly probably was aware of that, being at one time the head of the CIA. So, anywhoozle, banking sucks.
It's all interrelated.
No offense, Dad. You're trying to take care of people.
It's central banks.
Central banking
are the problem. Ones that are artificially empowered. I can read you. By the way, there's another.
Banking sucks. That was terrible.
There was another interesting speech I just wanted to mention. There was actually
whatever, man.
There was actually a congressman who, during the Great Depression, he gave this impassioned 25-minute speech against the Federal Reserve. He also ended up dead a few years later in what some have speculated could have been an assassination,
right?
Poisoning.
Of course.
It's like thrombosis, arterial thrombosis, or something like that. But I don't know. I just thought he had some good quotes in there. He started off the speech. Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions in the world ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks herein after referred to as the Fed. The Fed has cheated the government of these United States and the people of the United States out of enough money to pay the nation's debt. The depredations and iniquities of the Fed has cost enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States, has bankrupted itself, and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the defects of the law under which it operates, through the maladministration of the law by the Fed, and through the corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it. And it's quite a long thing. He actually talks about Andrew Jackson, and it's a long speech. I think he was calling for the impeachment of the president too at one point. But
Jackson,
of either
Henry Harrison.
No, this was 1934.
Oh.
But yeah, I'm not going to read the whole speech. But anyway, just there's a lot of interesting history there, folks. That was the point of tonight. You should really look into this stuff. There's things there to look at for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Educate yourself so you're not you don't get taken advantage of, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to change the way we live, is by examining the past and no longer making the same mistakes that we continue to make. It's so obvious and right out in front of your face, folks. Open your fucking eyes.
And stop being afraid, and stop trying to get politicians and police and armies to protect you from what you're afraid of.
Exactly.
Because you're only going to end up making yourself more repressed.
Exactly.
In the long run.
Because all those institutions which you create out of your fear have protocols that they have to follow, and they don't respect they don't respect your personage. You to them are part of their routine. And that's why you have situations like Freddie Gray and Michael Brown and all these other situations.
I saw a great video on Facebook today. It was like on Cop Block or something of these cops all in plain clothes show up to this lady's house. And I guess right before she started filming, they were threatening to kick the door down. So she opens the door and she starts filming on her camera.
Oh, is this the woman with her daughters
in
the apartment in New York?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you know what's funny though is the turn, like when she's like, "You need a warrant," and they start to leave, and then she got like a little more boisterous, like, "Yeah, film them all," and then like they just got pissed off, like, "All right, well we're coming in anyway," like just fucking thugs, man, like just criminals with badges, really, just violating the law.
Yeah, like
That's what it
rooting,
is.
kind of rooting
It's
around her house, and it
just like
was,
really, it's
yeah.
just like. It's like the mafia with badges. Like, just thugs come in, do whatever they want, and like, it's like, we're gonna sue you, and like, okay, go ahead, sue us, whatever, we don't care.
Yeah, talk to our superior.
Yeah, right.
Talk to my
Yeah,
superior
because
officer.
what happens?
Here's my badge number.
Because you know what happens? You sue the city. You know who the city is going to charge? The taxpayers. You sue
Yeah.
the city, you end up paying
Yeah.
yourself. It's such bullshit.
Yep.
Because there's no respect for the rule of law. That's what it is. There's more laws, more crimes by these laws, and yet the rule of law, as defined by the Constitution, has completely gone out the window.
Right.
It does not exist anymore.
What are you gonna do? What you gonna do? That's the way it goes. This is a nation built off of robbery, you know, and all kinds of wicked things.
Again, I'm hopeful in our generation. I think that people our age can recognize it and can hopefully improve it at least a little bit.
I feel like
maybe not make things perfect, but at least make things a little
I
bit
feel
better.
like we know a lot of people who give a shit.
Mm.
And I think at this point in our lives, we've sort of surrounded ourselves with people who are like-minded.
Still trying to convince others. Still trying to convince you, Josh. I'm holding out hope for you.
I don't think he listens to the show, to be honest with you.
Post on his page. See what he
I
says.
wouldn't know. We can advertise a little bit more, but I don't think old JD is gonna be tuning in. He might get a little upset. I'm not really sure how he would respond to my views. I mean, I disagree with him on a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
but
He's pretty well reasoned actually when he doesn't get emotional.
well, that's the thing is
the
you gotta
problem is
like
he
keep
gets-
it. You gotta
he gets
keep it at a
upset
6.
And it gets very like insulting and full of swears and caps lock and just emotional.
Yeah.
But like when he doesn't do that, there's times when he doesn't do that, and it's very rational. It's like, okay, I see where you're coming from. I understand your logic. I disagree with it, but I see it.
I think I've only really fenced with him a couple times. Jack and him used to get in the blowouts, and I wouldn't be involved. I would just read it, and maybe I would kind of chime in to try to calm it down, but to no avail.
But I hold out hope for everyone. If we can realize these things,
I don't know,
anyone
today.
can.
Today, man, I was in traffic, and there was a dude, in a Robin's Egg Blue Plymouth Grand Voyager minivan with the driver's side passenger window smashed out, duct taped with like a piece of plexiglass over where the window was, and like a duct tape seal. And this fucking thing, the traffic coming through Route 2 eastbound through Marlboro is diverted down to one lane because of the bridge repair. So everyone's like jockeying. There's traffic back into Glastonbury. So we've all been in traffic for a really long time. And you know how people are. You got the people on the extreme right. I knew it was coming, so I was in the lane that was the travel lane the whole way. And it's never going to be diverted. I didn't have to change lanes the whole time.
Right.
Because I knew it was coming because I was passed through it earlier today in the work truck. So we're coming through the traffic. And as everybody's kind of jockeying which way, you got the people to the right of me are trying to get into my lane. The people to the extreme right are driving around all the traffic and trying to somehow cut into front and find some magic shortcut. That's the people I really fucking hate because you see them like racing along the side.
Hey
and
man,
you're
I
just
drove
like,
traffic.
You're
for
making it
15
fucking worse
hours
for me,
last
asshole.
night. I understand your point,
Yeah.
but
But
you still
anyways,
got to have faith in humanity, Rob.
But this guy in the Plymouth Grand Voyager, he almost he was switching lanes back and forth like 3 cars ahead of me with no signals, like not at all, and really violent. Like as soon as he saw the opening, he was like, "Argh!" Like he just wrenched the wheel over, and the SUV in front of me had to keep hitting the brakes, and I had to keep hitting my brakes. It was very, very, very stressful. Just this little patch of traffic. Everyone else is moving along, but I happen to be stuck with this redneck psycho in front of me in a shitty old minivan. Well, don't let my opinions of traffic and my fellow New Englanders change your opinion. If you guys feel that we are able to rise up out of this cesspool that we've mired ourselves in, then you just keep on believing that. And I will try to do the same and maintain a mindful and prayerful heart for human harmony and general worldwide evolution. And I love all of you. This concludes our broadcast for this evening. Good night.